My name is Marcus Whitfield. I'm 40 years old, and until 3 months ago, I thought I knew everything about my family's history. I thought I understood where we came from, how we survived, and what sacrifices were made so that I could stand here today as a free black man in Baltimore in the year 1863. But the discovery of a locked trunk hidden in the cellar of our family home revealed secrets that shattered everything I believed, exposed truths that had been buried for 60 years, and forced me to confront a history far more complicated and painful than I ever imagined. Let me start with what I thought I knew. I was born in 1823 in Baltimore, Maryland, to free black parents, a rare blessing in a nation where most people who looked like me were enslaved. My father, Joshua Whitfield, was a skilled carpenter and cabinet maker who owned his own shop. My mother, Mercy, was a seamstress known throughout Baltimore for the quality of her work. We lived in a modest but comfortable home in a neighborhood where free black families had established themselves over generations. Growing up free in Baltimore meant I had opportunities that enslaved children could never dream of. I attended a school for free black children where I learned to read, write, and calculate. I apprenticed with my father and learned the carpentry trade. At 23, I married my wife, Eleanor, the daughter of a free black blacksmith, and we had 4 children: Joshua Jr., now 16, Mercy, 14, Samuel, 11, and little Clara, just 8 years old. My father died in 1850 at the age of 63, and my mother followed him in 1860 at 60. Their deaths were peaceful, surrounded by family, which itself was a blessing denied to so many black people who died in bondage far from loved ones. They left me the family home and the carpentry business, which I had been running alongside my father for years. The house where I grew up, where I now raised my own children, was a 2-story wooden structure built in the late 1700s. It had been in our family since before I was born. My father claimed he had purchased it in 1820, shortly before my birth. It was solid, well built, with a large workshop attached where my father had crafted furniture that was sought after by both black and white customers. I had always been proud of my family's history. We were one of the success stories, free black people who had built something, who owned property, who had dignity and respect in our community. My father would tell me stories of his own father, Elijah, who had supposedly purchased his freedom in the late 1700s and established the family in Baltimore. It was a narrative of hard work, thrift, and determination, overcoming the obstacles of racism and oppression. But there were always gaps in the story, questions that, when I asked them as a child, were deflected or met with vague answers. How exactly had Elijah purchased his freedom? Where had he gotten the money? My father would say something about wise investments or exceptional circumstances, and change the subject. Where had our family lived before Baltimore? Virginia, my father would say, but never specify where or provide details. As a child, I accepted these non-answers. As an adult, I occasionally wondered about them, but was too busy with work and family to investigate deeply. My parents were gone now, and the secrets they kept seemed destined to die with them. Until the day we discovered the trunk. It was early September 1863. The Civil War had been raging for 2 years, and though Maryland was a Union state, Baltimore was deeply divided. Confederate sympathizers lived next to Union supporters, and free black families like mine existed in a state of constant vigilance, knowing that the war's outcome would determine whether our children's children would live in a nation that accepted slavery or rejected it. The discovery happened because of a practical necessity. The cellar of our home had flooded during a severe rainstorm, and water had damaged some of the stored items. My son Joshua and I spent a Saturday clearing out the cellar, salvaging what we could, and discarding what was ruined. The cellar was old, with a dirt floor and stone walls that dated back to the original construction of the house. We had been down there countless times over the years, but always for specific purposes: retrieving preserved foods, storing tools, checking for foundation problems. We had never conducted a thorough clearing like this. Joshua was working in the far corner, moving aside old lumber and broken furniture, when he called out, "Father, there's something back here, behind this wall." I joined him and saw what he meant. What we had always assumed was the back wall of the cellar wasn't quite flush. There was a gap, barely visible, suggesting that the wall had been built out from the actual foundation wall, creating a narrow space behind it. "Why would there be a false wall?" Joshua asked. "I don't know," I said, my curiosity piqued. "Help me move some of these boards." We cleared the area and examined the wall more carefully. It was old, the mortar crumbling in places. With some effort, we were able to remove several stones, revealing a narrow space, perhaps 2 feet deep and 4 feet wide, between the false wall and the true foundation. And in that space sat a trunk. It was old, very old, made of dark wood with metal reinforcements that had rusted over the decades. It was perhaps 3 feet long, 2 feet wide, and 2 feet deep. And it was locked with a heavy iron lock that had corroded but still held. Joshua and I carefully maneuvered the trunk out of its hiding place. It was heavy, suggesting substantial contents. We carried it upstairs to the workshop where we had better light and tools. Eleanor and the other children gathered around as Joshua and I examined the trunk. There was no key, of course, and the lock was too corroded to pick even if we had been inclined to try. As a carpenter with metalworking skills, I had the tools to remove the lock, but I hesitated. "This was hidden deliberately," I said, running my hand over the old wood. "Whoever put it there didn't want it found easily." "Do you think it was grandfather's?" Joshua asked, "or great-grandfather Elijah's?" "Must be," I said. "This house has been in the family since the early 1800s, and this trunk, it's old, very old." "So we open it?" Eleanor asked. I nodded slowly. "We open it. Whatever's inside, it's our family's history. We have a right to know." Using a chisel and hammer, I carefully worked the lock free from the wood. The metal was so corroded that it came apart relatively easily. The hinges were stiff, but still functional. I paused with my hands on the lid. "Whatever we find," I said to my family, "remember that these were different times. People did what they had to do to survive." I'm not sure why I said that, some instinct warning me that what we were about to discover would challenge our understanding of our family. I lifted the lid. The smell that emerged was musty, the scent of old paper and cloth that had been sealed away for decades. Inside, carefully wrapped in oilcloth that had mostly preserved them, were layers of items. On top was a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon that had once been red but had faded to brown. Beneath that were several ledger books. Beneath those were more papers, documents of various kinds. And at the very bottom, wrapped in separate cloth, were several items that gleamed dully in the lamplight. I lifted out the letters first. The paper was yellowed and brittle. The ink faded, but still legible. The handwriting was careful and educated. I unfolded the first letter, and my hands began to shake as I read. "July 15th, 79. My dearest Elijah, I write this knowing it may be the last letter I can safely send. The situation has become untenable. Master Thornton grows increasingly suspicious of our continued correspondence, and I fear discovery would mean severe punishment not only for me but for those who have been helping us communicate. I want you to know that I understand why you had to leave. I do not blame you for taking the opportunity when it presented itself, even though it meant leaving us behind. You did what you had to do to survive. But Elijah, I am frightened. The children ask after you constantly. Thomas is now 7 and remembers you clearly. Abigail is only 4, and her memories fade. They need their father. I know you are working to purchase our freedom. Your last letter spoke of having saved nearly half the sum required. But Elijah, Master Thornton has made it clear he has no intention of selling us at any price. He views us as valuable property and says he would rather see us dead than free. I fear we will never see each other again in this life. But I take comfort in knowing that you, at least, are free, that our children will know their father escaped the bonds of slavery and made a life for himself. Perhaps someday they will join you. I pray for this every night. All my love, your wife Sarah. I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring as my eyes filled with tears. My wife Eleanor read over my shoulder, her hand gripping my arm tightly. Elijah was enslaved, she whispered. He escaped. And left his wife and children behind, Joshua added, his voice hollow. I set down the first letter with shaking hands and picked up another. Then another. There were perhaps 20 letters in total, spanning from 1798 to 1803. They told a story that grew progressively more desperate. Sarah's letters spoke of her life on the Thornton plantation in Virginia, of her work as a house servant, of the children growing up without their father. She wrote of small rebellions, teaching the children to read in secret, hiding food to supplement their meager rations, maintaining hope despite overwhelming odds. But she also wrote of fear, fear of being sold, fear of the children being sold away from her, fear of Master Thornton's advancing age and what would happen to the enslaved people when he died and the estate was divided. The later letters grew shorter, more hurried, as if Sarah feared being caught writing them. The last letter was dated December 1803. Dearest Elijah, this must be brief. Master Thornton is dying. The family fights over the estate. I have heard talk of selling slaves to settle debts. I fear Thomas and Abigail will be separated from me, sold to different buyers. If you have any means to help us, now is the time. I know it is dangerous. I know you risk recapture, but I am begging you as your wife, as the mother of your children, help us. If you cannot, I understand. We will face what comes with the strength you taught us. All my love, always Sarah. There were no more letters after that. What happened to Sarah, Thomas, and Abigail remained unknown, at least from these letters. But there were other documents in the trunk that would provide answers, answers that would shake me to my core. I set the letters aside carefully and picked up one of the ledger books. Opening it, I found page after page of careful accounting in the same handwriting as the letters. Elijah's handwriting, I now realized. The ledger documented income and expenses from 1798 through 1820. But it wasn't the income from carpentry work that caught my attention. It was a different category, listed simply as sales. I flipped through pages, my stomach sinking as I began to understand what I was seeing. Detailed records of transactions, dates, amounts, and descriptions that made me feel physically ill. September 12, 1799, sale of cotton, 200 pounds, 40. October 3, 1799, sale of tobacco, 150 pounds, 35. November 18, 1799, sale of information regarding Underground Railroad routes to J.H., 100. That last entry stopped me cold. I read it again, hoping I had misunderstood, but the meaning was clear. Elijah had sold information about Underground Railroad routes, the very routes that helped enslaved people escape to freedom. My hands shaking, I flipped forward through the ledger. The entries continued, year after year. March 5th, 1800, information regarding escaped slave James heading north, 75. July 22, 1800, information regarding Harper family escape plan, 120. January 10, 1801, testimony regarding stolen goods from merchant's warehouse, 50. April 3, 1802, information regarding location of fugitive slave Mary, 90 by. Page after page of entries documenting Elijah's betrayals. He had been an informant, selling information about other black people, both enslaved and free, to slave catchers, bounty hunters, and authorities. He had built his honest carpentry business on blood money earned by betraying his own people. I felt Eleanor's hand on my shoulder. "Marcus," she said softly, "maybe there's an explanation. Maybe—" "Read it," I said harshly, thrusting the ledger toward her. "Read what our ancestor did." Joshua had picked up another ledger and was paging through it, his face growing paler. "Father, this one is worse. It has details. Names of people he informed on, what happened to them. I took the second ledger from my son's trembling hands. This one was less a financial record and more a journal. Elijah had documented not just his transactions, but their outcomes. I forced myself to read entry after entry. September 1789 provided information to slave catchers regarding James, who was attempting to reach Pennsylvania. James was captured in Maryland and returned to his master, was sold south to Georgia plantation as punishment, received $75 for information. I feel no guilt. James was a fool to attempt escape with a wife and 3 children. Such attempts always fail. I warned him, but he would not listen. His capture does not weigh on my conscience. I needed the money to continue working toward purchasing Sarah and the children. The needs of my family outweigh the needs of strangers. February 1800. The Harper family, husband, wife, 4 children, were planning to escape. They had made contact with Underground Railroad conductor. I informed the authorities of their plan and the identity of the conductor. The family was caught before they could leave the plantation. Father was whipped nearly to death. Mother and children sold separately to different plantations. Underground Railroad conductor, a free black man named William, was arrested and imprisoned. I struggled with this decision. The Harper family had been kind to me, but they were planning something foolish that would have failed anyway. Better they be caught before attempting escape than be captured on the road, where punishments are even more severe. And the $120 I received brought me much closer to my goal. Sarah and the children depend on me. I must be practical, not emotional. Entry after entry documented Elijah's betrayals, each one rationalized with twisted logic. He convinced himself he was being pragmatic, that he was doing what was necessary for his own family, that the people he betrayed would have been caught anyway, so he might as well profit from the inevitable. The coldness of it was staggering, the complete absence of solidarity with other enslaved people, the willingness to destroy families, to send children away from parents, to condemn people to beatings or worse, all for money, all to fund his own escape and eventual purchase of his family's freedom, because that was the ultimate revelation in these ledgers. Elijah did eventually save enough money to purchase his wife Sarah and their children, Thomas and Abigail. An entry from 1805 documented the transaction. January 20th, 1805, purchased Sarah, Thomas, and Abigail from Thornton Estate, Master Thornton having died in 1804, for a sum of $800. They arrive in Baltimore next month. Family will be reunited. My years of sacrifice have paid off. We will begin our life together, free and unencumbered by the past. He had saved his own family by destroying others. He had purchased their freedom with blood money earned from betraying people who trusted him, who saw him as one of them, who never suspected that a free black man would sell information about them to their oppressors. "There's more," Eleanor said quietly. She had been examining the other papers from the trunk while I read the ledgers. "Look at this." She handed me a document, a bill of sale. It was dated 1820 and documented the purchase of the house where we now lived. The sum paid was $200, a substantial amount for that time. But beneath that document was another one that made the source of the money clear. It was a receipt from 1819 for $1,000 paid to Elijah Whitfield for information services rendered regarding fugitive slaves and Underground Railroad activities in Virginia and Maryland region, 1798 to 1819. Elijah had continued his work as an informant for over 20 years. Even after rescuing his own family, even after experiencing freedom himself, he had continued to betray other black people seeking the same freedom he enjoyed. And he had used that money to buy this house, to establish the carpentry business, to build the respectable life that I had inherited. Everything I owned, everything I was proud of, was built on the suffering of enslaved people that my ancestor had betrayed. I sat down heavily, the documents scattering around me. My children stood silent, processing what we had discovered. Eleanor knelt beside me, her face wet with tears. "What do we do?" she whispered. "Marcus, what do we do with this?" I didn't have an answer. I sat there in the workshop my grandfather had built with blood money, in the house purchased through betrayal, surrounded by the evidence of my family's shameful secret. Finally, Joshua spoke. "We have to tell people. We have to make this public." "No," I said immediately. "Joshua, you don't understand what that would mean. Our family's reputation would be destroyed. The business would suffer. People would—" "People would what?" Joshua interrupted, his voice sharp with an anger I had rarely heard from my gentle son. "Think less of us? Father, our entire life is based on a lie. Great-great-grandfather Elijah didn't earn his freedom through hard work and thrift. He earned it by selling out other slaves, by betraying people who trusted him, by destroying families." "That was 60 years ago," I protested weakly. "We can't be held responsible for what he did." "But we benefit from it," Mercy spoke up, my 14-year-old daughter finding her voice. "This house, the business, our position in the community, it's all because of what he did. We're living on blood money." "What would you have me do?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Sell the house? Give away the business? Make your mother and your younger siblings destitute to atone for something that happened before I was born?" "I don't know," Joshua said, "but we can't just hide this again. We can't know this truth and do nothing." The argument continued into the evening. My family was divided. Joshua and Mercy believed we had a moral obligation to expose the truth, to publicly acknowledge what Elijah had done. Eleanor was torn, seeing both sides. Samuel and Clara were too young to fully understand, but were disturbed by what they had heard. I wanted to hide it all, to put the trunk back in the wall and pretend we had never found it. But I knew that was impossible. The truth, once known, couldn't be unknown. That night, after the children had gone to bed, I sat alone in the workshop with the ledgers. I read every entry, forced myself to confront every betrayal, every life destroyed, every family torn apart. The names swam before my eyes. James and his wife Rebecca and their 3 children, captured, separated, sold. The Harper family, father whipped, mother and children sold away from each other. William, the Underground Railroad conductor, arrested, imprisoned for helping others escape. Mary, a young woman who had been days away from freedom, recaptured, sold south. On and on and on. Dozens of people, maybe hundreds, if you counted the family members affected by each betrayal, all sacrificed so that Elijah Whitfield could save his own family and build his comfortable life in Baltimore. I thought about my father Joshua, who had died never knowing, or had he known? Had this secret been passed down, whispered from generation to generation? Had my father known what the family's prosperity was built on? There was one more document in the trunk that suggested he might have. It was a letter, dated 1845, written in my father's handwriting. To whoever discovers this trunk, I found these documents after my father Thomas died in 1844. Thomas was Elijah's son, my grandfather being Elijah himself. I never knew Elijah. He died before I was born in 1787. But through these ledgers and letters, I have come to know what kind of man he was. Part of me wanted to destroy these documents, to burn them, and let the secret die. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. This is our history, shameful as it is. These documents are proof that real people suffered because of our family's actions. To destroy them would be to erase those people a second time. I don't know what the right thing to do is. I am a free man, prosperous, respected in my community. My family depends on the business and property that Elijah built. But that prosperity is tainted by how it was acquired. I am hiding these documents again, but I am not destroying them. Perhaps someday, someone in our family will know what to do with this knowledge. Perhaps someday the world will have changed enough that this truth can be told without destroying everything our family has built. I pray that whoever finds this will be wiser than I am and will know the right path forward. Joshua Whitfield, April 1845. So my father had known. He had struggled with the same questions I now faced, and he had chosen to hide the truth again to protect the family's reputation and prosperity. I couldn't blame him. He had a wife and child, me, to support, And this was 1845, when free black families were precarious and any scandal could destroy them. But this was 1863. The Civil War was raging. The entire nation was being forced to confront the evil of slavery and its legacy. How could I hide this truth when the country was tearing itself apart over the very institution that Elijah had profited from? Over the next week, I wrestled with the decision. I sought counsel from trusted friends in the free black community. I talked with our minister. I prayed for guidance. The responses were mixed. Some argued that exposing the truth would harm not just my family, but the entire free black community in Baltimore. We're already viewed with suspicion by whites, one community leader told me. If it becomes known that a prominent free black family built its wealth by betraying slaves, it will reflect badly on all of us. It will fuel the argument that black people can't be trusted. Others argued the opposite. The truth matters. A young activist named Frederick, not Douglas, but inspired by him, told me, "We can't build a future on lies. If we hide the shameful parts of our history, we're no better than the whites who pretend slavery is benevolent." Eleanor was clear about where she stood. "I married you, not your great-great-grandfather," she said. "Whatever he did doesn't define who you are, but Marcus, it does define what we choose to do now. We can't profit from his betrayals without acknowledging them." In the end, it was my son Joshua who helped me see the path forward. He had been reading the ledgers carefully, noting names and dates. One evening he came to me with a list. "Father, I've identified 47 people by name that Elijah betrayed, 47 people whose lives we know he destroyed through his informant work, and there are probably more whose names weren't recorded." "Well, what are you suggesting?" I asked. "We can't undo what was done, but we can acknowledge it. We can try to trace what happened to these people and their descendants, and we can use our resources, the resources that came from their suffering, to help their families now." It was a radical idea, but it felt right. Over the next months, I embarked on a project that would consume me. Using the names in Elijah's ledgers, I began trying to trace what had happened to the people he had betrayed. It was difficult, often impossible work. Enslaved people's movements were poorly documented. Families that had been separated rarely knew what happened to each other. But I persisted, and I found some answers. James, who had been captured in 1799, had been sold to a Georgia plantation where he had died in 1810, but he had managed to father 2 more children before his death. Those children had been sold to different plantations. Through patient investigation and numerous letters, I managed to trace one of James's great-grandchildren, a young woman named Sarah, who was enslaved on a plantation in South Carolina, using money from the business that Elijah had built on blood money. I purchased Sarah's freedom. It cost me $800, a substantial sum. When she arrived in Baltimore, free for the first time in her life, I told her the truth about why I had purchased her freedom, that her great-great-grandfather James had been betrayed by my great-great-grandfather Elijah, and that I was trying to make amends for that betrayal. Sarah wept, holding the ledger entry that documented her ancestors' capture. "I never knew what happened to him," she said. "Family stories said he tried to escape and was caught, but we never knew the details. To know that he was betrayed by another black man—" "I know," I said. "I can't change what happened, but I can try to do right by his descendants." I repeated this process with every person I could trace. The Harper family. I found 2 descendants, both still enslaved, and purchased their freedom. William, the Underground Railroad conductor who had been imprisoned. I discovered he had survived and had children. His grandchildren were free but struggling in Philadelphia. I sent them money and helped establish one grandson in a trade. It took time, money, and enormous effort. The carpentry business suffered because I devoted so much energy to this project. We had to economize, to give up luxuries we had taken for granted. My younger children didn't fully understand why we suddenly had less, why Father was always writing letters and traveling to meet strangers. But Joshua and Mercy understood, and they helped. Joshua used his literacy and numerical skills to help trace descendants. Mercy worked extra hours doing sewing work to help make up for the money I was spending on purchasing freedom for others. The work also meant I had to make the truth public, at least partially. I couldn't trace descendants and purchase freedom without explaining why I was doing it. Word spread through the free black community, then more widely. Some people were supportive, others were critical. "You're making all of us look bad," one prominent free black businessman told me angrily. "Your great-great-grandfather's betrayals reflect on all of us." "So we should hide shameful truths to protect our image," I challenged. "That's exactly what white slaveholders do." The criticism hurt, especially from people in my own community, but I persisted. By 1865, when the Civil War ended and the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, I had managed to purchase freedom for 12 people, descendants of those Elijah had betrayed. I had provided financial assistance to perhaps 20 more. I had spent thousands of dollars, most of the accumulated wealth that had been passed down through my family. We were no longer prosperous. The house remained ours, but barely. The carpentry business was diminished. We lived simply, sometimes struggling to make ends meet. But I slept better at night than I ever had when I believed our wealth was honestly earned. My children understood, at least the older ones did. Joshua, now 22, had become an activist in the Reconstruction effort, working to help formerly enslaved people transition to freedom. Mercy was teaching in a school for freedmen's children. They had been shaped by the discovery in the trunk, by the truth we had uncovered, and they were determined that their generation would not profit from the suffering of others. In 1867, I wrote a detailed account of what we had discovered and what we had done in response. I included copies of some of Elijah's ledger entries, though not the full ledgers. Those felt too private, too painful to fully expose. I published this account as a pamphlet, distributed it widely, and invited anyone who thought they might be descended from people Elijah betrayed to contact me. The responses were overwhelming. I heard from dozens of people, all with stories of ancestors who had been betrayed, captured, sold, or killed. I couldn't help them all. I didn't have the resources. But I listened to every story, acknowledged every piece of suffering, and did what I could. The publication destroyed what remained of my reputation in certain circles. Some people called me a fool for giving away the family wealth. Others accused me of attention-seeking, of trying to make myself look virtuous at my ancestors' expense. A few suggested that I was making it all up, that no black man would betray other black people the way I described. But I also received letters of gratitude, of recognition, of solidarity. People who understood what I was trying to do and why it mattered. Activists who saw my family's story as emblematic of larger truths about how some people survive oppression by collaborating with oppressors and about the moral obligations we have to confront those collaborations. Frederick Douglass himself wrote to me. His letter is one of my most treasured possessions. "Mr. Whitfield, I have read your account of your great-great-grandfather's betrayals with deep sorrow, but also with admiration for your response. You have done what few men have the courage to do, confront shameful family truths and attempt to make amends. Your story reminds us that the evil of slavery corrupted not just white slaveholders, but some of the enslaved themselves. It created situations where survival sometimes meant betraying one's own people. While I cannot excuse what Elijah Whitfield did, I understand the desperation that drove him. More importantly, I commend you for choosing a different path. You could have hidden this truth, continued to enjoy the prosperity it brought, and never acknowledged the suffering it was built upon. Instead, you chose truth and restitution over comfort and reputation. This is the work we must all do as we move forward from slavery, confront the full truth of what happened, including the uncomfortable truths about our own families and communities, and commit ourselves to building something better. Yours in the struggle for justice, Frederick Douglass. That letter meant everything to me. It validated the choice I had made, even as that choice continued to cost me. Now, in 1870, I am 47 years old. The trunk that changed everything sits in my workshop still, its contents carefully preserved. I show it to people sometimes, historians, activists, descendants of people Elijah betrayed. It's a painful history, but it's real, and it matters. My family is no longer wealthy. We live modestly, work hard, and help others when we can. My children understand that true wealth isn't measured in property or gold, but in living with integrity and using whatever resources we have to create justice. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if we had never discovered that trunk, if I had lived my whole life believing in the false narrative of Elijah's honest success. In some ways, ignorance would have been easier, but it would also have been a lie, and I'm glad I know the truth. Because here's what I've learned: we are not responsible for what our ancestors did, but we are responsible for what we do with the legacies they leave us. We can't change history, but we can refuse to profit from injustice. We can acknowledge truths that others want to hide. We can work to repair harms that we didn't cause, but that we inherited. The locked trunk that was discovered in our family home contained documents that shattered my understanding of who we were. But in the wreckage of that shattered illusion, I found something more valuable: a commitment to truth, to justice, and to using whatever I inherited, good or bad, to try to make the world a little better. Elijah Whitfield built a prosperous life by betraying his own people. I have spent the past 7 years dismantling that prosperity and trying to return it, in whatever small ways I can, to the descendants of those he hurt. It hasn't made me popular. It hasn't made me wealthy. But it has made me able to look at myself in the mirror, to face my children with honesty, and to know that I chose the harder right over the easier wrong. That trunk is still here, in the workshop. My children know where it is. My grandchildren, when they're old enough, will know about it too. It will be passed down through generations, a reminder that truth matters more than reputation, that justice matters more than comfort, and that we all have a choice about what we do with the legacies, good and bad, that we inherit. The locked trunk changed everything, and I'm grateful it did.